News, devil in the details. What's this about tax hikes to pay for health care? The president makes his case on our broadcast tonight. The hot button issue at the Supreme Court confirmation hearing, and what does Perry Mason have to do with it? Need to know basis. What if the test could determine you were going to get Alzheimer's? Would you want to know? And vets in Toyland, they served their nation in war. Now these veterans are making a difference by hand for kids in need. Nightly News begins now.
From NBC News World Headquarters in New York, this is NBC Nightly News with Brian Williams.
Good evening. The president tried again today to be heard on the subject of health care. In an interview you're about to hear, he said today the worst thing would be to do nothing at all. Whatever Washington comes up with will affect every one of us. And the newest idea for how to help pay for it all is to get the money from the people who have the money, the wealthiest Americans. Our chief medical editor, Dr. Nancy Snyderman, interviewed the president earlier today. She's standing by at the White House. First, Kelly O'Donnell's at the Capitol with a look at where all this stands tonight. Kelly, good evening.
Good evening, Brian. The heat on health care was really turned up today, and it was the president who lit the fire. After lots of rumblings that here in Congress they were losing momentum, might miss their own August deadline, the president jumped in.
Well, I think the most important thing for people to understand is that the system as it is unsustainable.
That declaration delivered with one of the president's high-profile tools, sit-down interviews offered to the network's top medical reporters, then amplifying that message with the quiet power of a Rose Garden backdrop.
I just want to be clear. We are going to get this done.
Tactics to leverage Mr. Obama's appeal and persuasion to demand action on health care reforms.
We are closer than we've ever been to fundamental reforms that provide people choice, make health care affordable.
On Capitol Hill, a milestone. Plans from both the House and Senate.
Senator Mikulski. Senator Bingaman.
Today, with no Republican support, Democrats on a key Senate committee pushed through a sweeping plan.
Health care coverage that is available, undeniable, and affordable.
This legislation has not one single provision that is aimed at reducing the cost of health care.
The House and Senate plans include one of the president's must-haves, a government-run program to compete with private insurers, plus a requirement the president originally opposed but now says he'll accept, a mandate requiring all Americans get coverage and that big employers provide insurance to workers. But big questions and disagreements remain, like how to pay for what could be a $1 trillion program. The House calls for raising taxes on families making more than $350,000 a year. The Senate dislikes that formula, but so far has not provided a way to pay for it.
And Brian, there's still some distance to go because the Senate Finance Committee is wrestling with that issue of costs and trying to get some Republican support. And all of this is happening in a fierce environment with lobbyists and competing interests, the two major parties all going after each other, and the president promising to keep the pressure on. Brian?
Kelly O'Donnell on the Hill. And now across town in Washington to the other part of this. As we mentioned, our chief medical editor, Dr. Nancy Snyderman, talked to the president about health care today. We saw some of it. Nancy's with us from the White House lawn with more. Nancy, good evening.
Good evening, Brian. Just 3 days after being abroad, the president today jumped into the health care reform debate, re-energized and pledging change. He started with that ceremony in the Rose Garden and then sat down with me this afternoon.
What I haven't heard anyone ask is for the American public to pony up to, that this is going to require some give for all the stakeholders involved.
Let me talk about what I think the American people are going to have to do. First of all, the American people have to recognize that there's no such thing as a free lunch, right? So we can't just provide care to everybody. It has no cost whatsoever. You don't end up having to make any decisions.
So self-responsibility.
Self-responsibility is going to be critical. This is probably not going to be something that's legislated.
On the issue of an individual mandate for health insurance, the president said he's been persuaded.
But I've changed my mind on this because what I was persuaded of was that if we can phase this in so that we know there's affordable insurance out there, and in fact a lot of the uninsured are relatively young people who can be insured fairly cheaply, that actually will drive down the cost for everybody.
But how to pay for fixing the nation's healthcare system? Mr. Obama has repeatedly said he's against any direct tax on people's healthcare benefits.
What I've said is that the better way to do this is to finance most of reform through reallocating dollars that are already being paid into the system.
And on managing his own health?
Mr. President, I know you hate this, but is the battle with the cigarettes going okay? I would be remiss as a cancer surgeon not to ask you how you're doing.
I'm doing quite well, thank you.
The real issue now is going to be timing. The clock is ticking, and this fall, that's when the real battle will begin. Brian.
Nancy Snyderman at the White House for us tonight. Nancy, thank you for that. Meantime, the president's Supreme Court nominee, Sonia Sotomayor, was answering senators' questions on what was her third day now of confirmation hearings. There was a lot of talk, as you might imagine, about her view of the Constitution, but also her television viewing as a kid came up and how it shaped her as an adult. Our Justice correspondent, Pete Williams, on duty at the court building tonight. Pete, good evening.
Brian, nothing has arisen so far to derail this nomination, and Judge Sotomayor seemed to show today that she knows it, and today's hearing did have a genuine Perry Mason moment.
What is the settled law in America about abortion?
Republicans pressed further today for her views on abortion. Tom Coburn of Oklahoma, who's also a doctor, asked about the effect of medical advances that could change the definition of when a fetus is viable.
Should that have any bearing as we look at the law?
I can't answer that in the abstract. We don't make policy choices in the court.
And she said she never discussed abortion with President Obama.
I was asked no question by anyone, including the president, about my views on any specific legal issue.
Firefighters from New Haven who oppose her nomination sat behind her today, reminders in uniform of one of her most controversial decisions, her ruling against them on reverse discrimination. But throughout the hearing, Judge Sotomayor grew more relaxed and confident, free with gestures and flashes of humor.
She has plenty of stories.
And she painted a picture today of a moment from her public housing childhood in the Bronx, when she drew inspiration from the family black and white TV. An early hero, she said, was fictional defense lawyer Perry Mason, who lost only one case in 271 episodes. She vividly recalled one that ended in a conversation with the DA, Hamilton Berger.
Perry said to the prosecutor, "It must cause you some pain having expended all that effort in your case to have the charges dismissed." And the prosecutor looked up and said, "No, my job as a prosecutor is to do justice. And justice is served when a guilty man is convicted and when an innocent man is not." And I thought to myself, that's quite amazing.
Round two.
That inspired freshman Senator Al Franken of Minnesota, a man with his own past in TV.
What was the one case in Perry Mason
Well,
that Berger
I
won?
wish I remembered the name of the episode, but I don't.
And you don't remember that case?
I know that I should remember the name of it, but I haven't looked at the episodes.
Didn't the White House prepare you for that?
Is the senator from Minnesota going to tell us which episode that was?
I don't know. That's why I was asking.
For the record, the one that Perry Mason lost was the case of the deadly verdict in 1963 when Sonia Sotomayor was 9 years old, Brian.
Pete Williams covering justice and a little bit of television tonight from the court building for us. Pete, thanks. The